started talking about me being a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. Family, if you look at my bio, if you look in the room that you're in, you will see that I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. I have no issue with that. I'm not Greek, I'm an African. And you need to understand that. Do I belong to a Greek letter organization? Yes, I do. Do I belong to a Greek letter organization? Yes, I do. Do I belong to a Greek letter organization? Yes, I do.
Now, we said that we were going to talk about civilization. So that's what I'm going to do. Before we even talk about our ideas and contrast them, we need to talk about, well, what is the origin of civilization? I'm going to do this very quickly. We only have 40 minutes. And my discussion on the origin of civilization lasts 4 hours. So we really need to move quickly. So I'm going to just start here. And you are looking at an early human ancestor. This great African queen, I'll call her, that the Ethiopians call Dinknesh. Say Dinknesh with me, please. Dinknesh. Actually is not Homo sapien sapien like we are. She's a close relative to Homo sapien sapien. This great African queen, I'll call her, Should 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 this great African queen, I'll call her,
How do you go from hundreds of bone fragments to 47 skeleton bones to a missing link that supposedly lived 3 million years ago named Lucy? Lucy fills the pages of our public school textbooks, standing out as the leading icon for human evolution. But is Lucy really a missing link to humans, or is she just an extinct 3.5-foot ape? Stick around to find out. In 1974, Donald Johanson found a small elbow bone in the Ethiopian desert. Looking around, he found several other bones that looked like they could be from the same creature. He later returned to uncover hundreds of bone fragments scattered along a hillside. Later, his team pieced together the hundreds of fragments into 47 skeletal bones. They believed that the creature was an adult female that weighed 55 pounds and stood 3.5 feet tall, not anywhere close to a human. But after gluing these hundreds of bone pieces into 47 parts and creating models of what they think the creature looked like, evolutionists came up with some surprisingly human-like creatures. Wow, how do you go from this to these? And they didn't even find any hands or feet with Lucy, and they certainly didn't find any eye whites, a feature that only humans have and not apes. I wonder if they did this to make her look more human-like. In school textbooks across the country, Lucy is represented as a clear ape-to-human transition, walking upright, holding babies, and gazing intelligently as she walks. But is this really true? Is Lucy really our early human ancestor? Well, let's take a look at the evidence from head to toe. Starting with Lucy's skull, we really don't have much to go on. As leading paleontologist Dr. Leakey said, Lucy's skull was so incomplete that most of it was imagination made of plaster of Paris, thus making it impossible to draw any firm conclusion about what species she belonged to. When Lucy's actual skull bones are put together and the empty parts are filled in with what they imagine her skull looked like, she looks surprisingly similar to a modern bonobo. While we only have a few broken skull bones from Lucy, other skulls of Lucy's kind show that their spines entered into their skulls at an angle, just about like chimps, showing that she likely walked on all fours and not on 2 legs like humans. Next, we have the inner ears. Dr. Spoor, professor of evolutionary anthropology, has extensively studied the inner ears of various apes and humans. After studying Australopithecines, he revealed that the balancing system in their ears were the same as modern apes, enabling them to live in trees. Next, we have this vertebrae that was believed to be part of Lucy for over 40 years. Recently, scientists learned that it was actually from an extinct relative of the baboon. When Johanson first discovered Lucy's pelvis, he reported it was badly crushed with distortion and cracking. His team believed that it had been broken apart and then fused together during later fossilization, which caused it to be in an anatomically impossible position and to flare out like a chimp's pelvis. Their solution to this? Use a buzzsaw to cut it apart and piece it back together. After this pelvis reconstruction, they noted it was a tricky job, but after taking out the kink of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours. Even evolutionists in the famous Human Evolution Journal have problems with this reconstruction, stating, "We think that the reconstruction overestimates the width of this pelvis area, creating a very human-like sacral plane." Since 1995, evolutionists have been battling out Lucy's gender, with some even suggesting that male names like Brucey or Lucifer would better fit the fossil. Now we have Lucy's wrist. When looking at a cast of Lucy's bones, experts at George Washington University revealed that her wrist was stiff like a chimpanzee's. This enabled Lucy's wrist to lock in place for knuckle walking, just like most apes today. Another study noted, measurements of the shape of wrist bones showed that Lucy's type were knuckle walkers, similar to gorillas. Even the fingers of Lucy's kind have been shown to be curved and ape-like, best suited for swinging in trees. Next, we have Lucy's short little legs. Bill Jungers at the Stony Brook Institute in New York argued that Lucy's legs were too short in relation to her arms for her species to have achieved a fully modern adaptation to bipedalism. In other words, she wasn't built for walking. Other researchers have concluded the same thing. While a knee joint was not even found with Lucy, a different knee that was found 1 year earlier had been used to try to prove that Lucy walked upright. This other knee was found over 8,000 feet away from where Lucy was found, and over 200 feet deeper in the ground. Johansson's lead team member said this knee was human, not ape. Most recently, a team of scientists from the University of Texas conducted 38,000 scans of Lucy's bones. After researching the different breaks and fractures, they concluded that she died while falling over 40 feet out of a tree while she was awake, even trying to break her fall. Lucy, a little 3.5-foot, 55-pound ape that supposedly walked on 2 feet like a human, died by falling 40 feet out of a tree. Made of hundreds of bone fragments glued together to make 47 parts, even accidentally including a vertebrae from a different species, do we really know what she was? Her skull, inner ears, locking wrist, curved fingers, and short legs reveal that she was definitely an ape. But that's not what evolutionists want you to think. Shown with human expressions, eye whites, which no apes have, and walking upright, they want you to think she was on her way to becoming human. They want you to believe that there are hundreds of Lucy's kind buried in the earth, as in this video where Johansson explains there are 400 Australopithecine specimens, and marches an army of hundreds of complete skeletons across the screen. But what he doesn't say is that he's talking about 400 bone specimens, not individuals, and 35% of these specimens are just teeth, and fewer than a dozen are skulls, all of which have been pieced together using numerous broken pieces. Here is a picture showing the majority of this entire collection, sitting on top of a single table. If human evolution really happened over millions of years, wouldn't we expect to find more? With over 7 billion humans alive today, shouldn't the ground be filled with transitions of apes still evolving into humans? Even Darwin realized that this was a problem by stating, "As by my theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth?" So, just what was Lucy? The answer is straightforward. Lucy and other Australopithecines are extinct apes, just like many other ape species that have gone extinct. She walked on all fours, ate the foods that apes eat, and lived among other animals that are similar to those that live around apes today. The idea that human and chimp DNA overlap by 98 to 99% has been widely used to promote the idea that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor millions of years ago. But have you considered how they came up with this estimate? One of the things that not many people know about this study is that large sections of DNA from both the human and the chimp genome were left out when making this comparison. Let's see how Minute Earth, a secular training site that holds to an evolutionary perspective, describes it.
When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Wow, ignoring 18% of the chimp genome and 25% of the human genome. That's a lot to ignore. In fact, this represents hundreds of millions in each side of the comparison. Could the sections they left out be responsible for coding most of the obvious differences we see between humans and chimps? The video explains.
And there's another problem. Just as a small tweak in a sentence can alter its meaning entirely, or not at all, a few mutations in DNA sometimes produce big changes in a creature's looks or behavior, whereas other times, lots of mutations make very little difference. So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are.
It certainly makes sense that just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are. Indeed, human DNA and gene-level comparisons are frequently made to other mammals, such as mice, cows, and even dogs with high levels of overlap. And we are obviously quite different from these animals. The fact is, the human and chimp genomes code for two completely different creatures. While both are mammals based on scientific criteria, God made man in His image and gave him a soul that is eternal. Chimps, which are soulless tree-dwelling animals, and humans, which are eternal souls wrapped in bodies that have vastly different capabilities than all animals, because we were created in God's image and charged to be caretakers over creation, including chimps. Being made in the image of God and charged with taking care over God's creation would mean that humans would have several distinctions from chimps. Let's take a look at just some of them. First, humans are the only living thing on the planet that has a conscience and a sense of morality. Our conscience lets us know when we failed or when we might fail to abide by either governmental laws or God's laws. Primates know nothing of laws. They live only by instincts. Next, humans can speak. For example, the English language contains over 1 million words, and we can speak all of them. Plus, we can even learn or invent totally different languages. Apes cannot speak any of them. They do not even have a speech program installed in their brains. Speaking of brains, ours are 400% larger than chimps. We're also much smarter, having an average IQ of 100 when chimps can't even take the test. Our brain cells' DNA carries very unique methylation patterns that enables us to think the way we do. The human neocortex is disproportionately large compared to the rest of the brain, with a 60-to-1 ratio of gray matter to the size of the medulla in our brainstems compared to just 30-to-1 in chimps. Overall, humans have almost twice as many spindle cells than chimps, enabling us to pull out memories from past experiences and use them to plot our next actions. These functions activate when moral dilemmas present decisions we need to make that will directly affect other lives. The insula part of our brains has 46 times the number of spindle cells compared to chimps, about 83,000 for humans compared to only about 1,800 for chimps. This makes sense because this part of our brain takes information from our skin, internal organs, and cardio system and converts it into subjective feelings such as empathy towards others who show signs of anguish or pain. Our DNA differences direct the construction of uniquely human physical attributes. For example, we are typically 38% taller than chimps, 80% heavier, and live twice as long. We have eye whites for rich and nuanced nonverbal communication, which no apes have. We walk upright, while chimps, with their curved fingers, long arms, and unique locking wrist systems, are designed for living in trees and walking on all fours. Their knees also point outward for climbing in trees, whereas our knees point forward so we can walk or run all day if needed. We can't even swap any of our internal organs with chimps. Humans build space shuttles, write songs, worship, pray, and sing. Chimps don't do any of these things. God specifically designed us, formed the first of us from dust into the image of God, and gave each of us an everlasting soul. We were charged to be caretakers over the entire animal kingdom. Yes, we share vast DNA sequences with chimps, but we should expect this on the basis of creation. We also share plenty of DNA with mammals other than chimps. After all, God made mammals and man to metabolize the same food sources, grow the same basic materials like bones, teeth, muscles, skin, and hair, and produce placentas and milk for the next generation. The fact that we have sections of DNA that are similar to these creatures only shows that our designer used similar DNA instructions for making similar features and functions. It does not mean that one creature led to the other. Bible-believing geneticist Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins said, "The programmer doesn't start from scratch each time he develops a new program. Instead, he uses the same general command that he used for other projects. It shows the creator's efficiency and ingenuity." We see the same pattern of both similarity and differences in organisms' genomes. Biblical creationists say the similarities in DNA arose because the same creator adapted the same basic code for separate created kinds. If a gene in different creatures encodes a similar protein for a similar biochemical pathway, it's not due to evolution, but because of a single programmer. This similarity is a hallmark of all human-engineered systems, so why should we not expect to see it in God's creation? Clearly, overhyped stories of chimp-human similarities overlook some basic observations. They overlook huge sections of DNA. They overlook the possibility of intentional programming to explain similar DNA sequences. And they overlook unbridgeable physical, mental, and moral differences.
Quran, chapter 15, verse 26. And certainly it was us who created the human race from black mud, shaped and fashioned. Quran, chapter 15, verse 28. And when your sustainer said to the angelic beings, surely I will create a human being from black mud, shaped and fashioned. Quran, chapter 33, verse 67 and 68. Verse 67. They will say, our Lord, we have obeyed our masters and our great ones, but they led us astray from the right path. Verse 68. Our Lord, give them double punishment and lay on them a mighty curse.